You hear governments proudly declare, "We are a secular republic," yet in mosques you still recite verses of divine law. You see flags of modern states, but many hearts yearn for the timeless guidance of Sharia. Is this tension a sign of inevitable conflict, or the beginning of a new synthesis? I'm FaqeerKhamosh. Over 8 parts, we will navigate the contested terrain between divine injunctions and human legislation, seeking whether they must clash or can coalesce. What exactly do we mean by Sharia? A divine blueprint derived from the Quran and Sunnah, encompassing worship, ethics, and social conduct. Not a rigid code, but a dynamic path, tariqah, guiding believers' lives. And secularism? A political principle separating religion from state affairs, ensuring laws apply equally to all citizens. In some models, it relegates religion to private life. In others, it allows religious values in the public sphere. So the question arises, can a law claimed as divine ever coexist with laws crafted by pluralistic debate, or must one overshadow the other? In the Prophet's Medina, the Constitution of Medina blended tribal customs with Quranic principles, a pluralistic polity recognizing Jews, Muslims, and allies under one legal framework. Yet, as empires expanded, caliphs ruled by Sharia interpreted through human jurists. Later, colonial powers imposed secular codes, sidelining religious courts. Ottoman Tanzimat reforms, 19th century, introduced secular laws alongside Sharia. Post-colonial states like Turkey and Tunisia enshrined strict secularism, abolishing caliphate, religious courts, and even banning Arabic in legal texts. These historical shifts ask us, were they betrayals of faith or necessary evolutions in governance? And what lessons do they offer today? In our quest to understand how Sharia and secularism might coexist, we first turn to 3 emblematic secular frameworks. Each offers valuable lessons and warns of pitfalls for Muslim-majority societies wrestling with divine law and democratic governance. 1. French laïcité, the radical wall of separation. Origins and principles, born in the crucible of 1905's law on the separation of churches and state, laïcité enshrines an austere neutrality. Religious expression in public institutions is prescribed, no headscarves in schools, no crucifixes in courtrooms. The state asserts an absolute firewall between faith and legislation. Strengths. It guarantees that no creed can impose its moral code on others. Citizenship is uniform, the mosques, churches, synagogues. Each congregation prays in its own quarters. Weaknesses. For many Muslims, this rigid separation feels like exclusion. The headscarf ban in public schools in 2004 forced young believers to choose between faith and education. Laïcité's promise of neutrality can morph into erasure of visible piety. Lesson for Muslim states. A blanket ban on religious symbols secures formal equality but risks alienating entire communities, pushing faith from the public square into hidden enclaves where unregulated interpretations may flourish. 2. United States, wall of separation, pragmatic pluralism, origins and principles. Embedded in the First Amendment, 1791, the U.S. model bars Congress from establishing religion or prohibiting its free exercise. No state church. Yet public life remains suffused with religious references. In God we trust, on currency, legislative prayers in Congress. Strengths. Vibrant faith communities enrich civil society. Faith-based charities, interfaith dialogue, and religiously inspired human rights activism thrive. Diverse creeds coexist under the same legal roof. Weaknesses. In practice, minority faiths can become targets under broad religious freedom claims. seen, for example, in court battles over Islamic burials or zoning for mosques. The model's strength for majoritarian faith can become a vulnerability for smaller groups. Lesson for Muslim states. A flexible, open-ended neutrality allows religious voices in public debate, but without robust protections for all creeds, the majority's traditions may dominate the cultural narrative. 3. Indian secular pluralism, customary coexistence, origins and principles. Since independence in 1947, India has defined itself as a secular republic, yet recognizes personal laws, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Parsi, for marriage, divorce, and inheritance. The state courts adjudicate criminal and commercial matters uniformly. Strengths. Communities govern key aspects of personal status according to their traditions, fostering a living pluralism. This legal diversity acknowledges that law is not merely civil code, but also a repository of cultural identity. Weaknesses. Disparate personal laws can perpetuate inequalities and communal tensions. Female inheritance rights vary drastically between Hindu and Muslim codes. Efforts to unify a single civil code have stalled amid fears of cultural domination. Lesson for Muslim states. Recognizing religious law in personal matters can preserve identity and legitimacy, yet without harmonization and oversight, it risks deepening gender and class divides. Which model best protects both public order and private devotion? When neutrality becomes invisibility, who loses space to express faith? Does granting personal law autonomy entrench social hierarchies or affirm cultural dignity? In each of these paradigms, we find both aspiration and caution, the French desire for secular peace, the American faith in pluralist tolerance, the Indian balancing act of diversity. Islam's engagement with secularism will need to draw selectively from these experiments, borrowing rigor without alienation, protecting conscience without fostering division. Now, let us turn inward to 4 Muslim-majority nations, each charting its own route between Sharia's authority and secular governance: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Morocco. Iran. Theocratic governance with republican trappings, constitutional framework. Post-1979, Iran fused juristic rule with electoral politics. The supreme leader, Wali Faqih, vets all legislation and candidates for Sharia compliance. The parliament debates civil laws, but guardian councils can veto them on religious grounds. Areas of overlap and conflict. Civil courts handle business contracts and criminal law broadly, yet religious courts dominate family, inheritance, and moral offenses. Entrepreneurs face legal uncertainty when business statutes contradict fatwas. Political dissidents argue that theocratic oversight stifles reform. Adaptive ijtihad. Some jurists invoke maqasid al-shara, objectives of Sharia, to justify social welfare provisions, expanding women's rights in limited spheres, promoting poverty alleviation. Yet inconsistent application fuels public distrust. Are rights granted by divine law or political expedience? Saudi Arabia, custodian of 2 holy mosques, judicial structure. Until recently, all courts answered solely to classical Hanbali fiqh. A 2015 reform introduced specialized commercial courts, but family and criminal matters remain under religious magistrates. Executive-driven change. Major social reforms, women driving, cinemas reopening, have been enacted by royal decree rather than judicial reinterpretation. This top-down approach accelerates modernization but sidesteps traditional channels of religious consensus. Tensions, codification efforts, 2018 penal law, attempted to clarify punishments yet remain couched in Sharia language. Critics note that modern state imperatives, economic diversification, tourist visas, often clash with rigid legal texts, leading to selective enforcement. Indonesia, decentralized pluralism, constitutional Pancasila, guarantees belief in one God, protects religious freedom. Provincial Sharia courts operate only in Aceh, authorized under autonomy laws, issuing hudud penalties for moral crimes. Elsewhere, Sharia informs but does not override civil statutes. Hybrid legal practice. The Supreme Court may cite Quranic principles when interpreting broader laws, anti-corruption, environmental rulings, infusing moral weight without imposing religious sanctions. Local fatwas guide social norms but lack binding force. Social dynamics. This flexibility fosters a vibrant Islamic finance sector and faith-based charities, yet calls for national Sharia integration periodically surge, testing the limits of constitutional pluralism. Morocco, consultative monarchy with constitutional safeguards. Constitutional anchoring. Islam is state religion, but freedom of conscience is guaranteed. 2011 Constitution. The Conseil supérieur des oulémas advises on religious matters. The Ministry of Habuz oversees endowments. Reform via ijtihad. The 2004 Mudawana Family Code expanded women's marriage and inheritance rights through progressive reinterpretation of Sharia. This reform was championed by both civil activists and religious scholars, illustrating a collaborative path. Remaining limits. Criminal laws still penalize apostasy and proselytism. Civil society groups press for broader decriminalization, arguing that human rights norms must temper religious injunctions. Can Iran's republican theocracy evolve toward genuine pluralism, or is its duality inherently unstable? Does Saudi Arabia's decree-driven modernization signal a new model or a perilous bypass of religious legitimacy? Can Indonesia's tiered Sharia application serve as a blueprint for federal pluralism elsewhere? Has Morocco demonstrated that constitutional consultation mechanisms can legitimize meaningful reform? These 4 case studies reveal that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The balance of divine guidance and secular necessity must be renegotiated within each nation's history and social fabric. In every legal system, laws shape daily life. When Sharia and secular statutes intertwine, the effects ripple through homes, markets, and public institutions. Let us examine how our 4 case studies translate into lived realities. Iran's dual courts and the businessman's dilemma: family law versus commercial law. A Muslim entrepreneur may celebrate a marriage under religious courts, benefiting from Sharia's emphasis on mutual rights, yet face secular courts when dissolving a contract. Conflicting judgments on collateral or interest, riba, create uncertainty, driving many to informal, opaque networks. Access to justice. Rural citizens often lack resources or knowledge to navigate parallel systems. Women, in particular, may struggle to enforce inheritance rights if secular courts defer to conservative clerics. This gap fuels social inequality and erodes trust in both religious and state institutions. Economic trust and foreign investment. Multinational firms hesitate when profit repatriation or lease disputes fall under unpredictable Sharia rulings. Iran's efforts to codify maqasid-based business ethics aim to reassure investors, but sporadic enforcement undermines credibility. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and social reform top-down liberalization. The Crown Prince's agenda has lifted bans, cinemas, concerts, and expanded women's rights. These reforms, however, bypass traditional consultative bodies, leaving citizens to adapt culturally, before legal frameworks catch up. Youth employment and social cohesion. Ambitious Saudization policies mandate local hiring quotas. Secular labor laws grant employees protections, but Sharia-inspired guardianship norms still restrict women's mobility. The tension between modern workforce needs and religious guardianship creates frustration among young professionals. Public perception. Citizens applaud new freedoms, yet worry about the fate of religious legitimacy. A Gallup survey in 2024 showed that 68% of Saudis support social liberalization, while 54% fear the erosion of Islamic values. Indonesia's decentralized mosaic Aceh versus Java. In Aceh, hudud punishments, caning for theft or adultery, are rarely carried out but loom as moral reminders. Elsewhere, Muslim-majority Java embraces Islamic finance, sukuk bonds, takaful insurance, under civil law, creating a booming halal economy. Interprovincial migration. Workers from secular provinces take jobs in Aceh only if willing to submit to stricter moral codes. This internal Sharia divide influences migration patterns, remittances, and regional development. Social services. Zakat distribution is managed by both religious agencies and municipal governments, resulting in overlapping welfare programs. While total aid reaches more recipients, coordination challenges can lead to duplication or neglect of vulnerable groups. Morocco's hybrid welfare state, Mudawana's social gains. Women now can initiate divorce under clear procedures, and minimum marriage age is uniformly enforced. These changes have led to a 25% drop in family disputes filed in court, reflecting enhanced social stability. Waqf modernization, endowments, Waqf, fund schools and hospitals, supervised by the Ministry of Habus. Transparent financial reporting, mandated by the 2018 Waqf law, attracts philanthropic capital from Gulf states, fueling public-private partnerships in education. Tourism and heritage. Morocco markets its moderate Islamic identity to global travelers. Halal-certified resorts and heritage tours at mosques generate revenue, demonstrating how constitutional freedom of conscience can be an economic asset. As states negotiate trade deals and human rights commitments, the interplay between Sharia and secular law takes on global dimensions. Trade agreements and investor protections, bilateral investment treaties, BITs, Saudi Arabia's 2022 BIT with the UK includes arbitration clauses shielding investors from religiously motivated expropriation. Yet local courts retain the prerogative to enforce morality-based statutes, creating legal ambiguity. Halal certification standards. Indonesia's national HACCP-based halal code, recognized by the OIC, obliges exporters to comply with religious slaughter and dietary rules. This alignment boosts market access but imposes compliance costs on small producers. Free trade zones. Morocco's Tangier. Medzone operates entirely under secular commercial law, attracting foreign manufacturers. Meanwhile, urban Sharia quarters sustain traditional crafts under religious courts, illustrating a spatial bifurcation of legal regimes. Human rights instruments, ICCPR and CDAW, Morocco and Indonesia have ratified key UN covenants demanding gender equality and freedom of belief. They issue reservations on articles conflicting with Sharia, but periodic reviews by the Human Rights Council spur incremental reforms, e.g., Morocco's 2019 pledge to revisit apostasy laws. EU-Muslim World Partnership. The EU's Strategic Dialogue on Human Rights engages Tunisian and Moroccan officials on balancing Islamic values with universal rights. Outcomes include training for religious judges on international norms and community workshops on freedom of expression. Legal harmonization efforts, OIC model laws. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation drafts harmonized statutes on bankruptcy, family law, electronic commerce, blending Sharia principles with global best practices. Member states adapt these templates to local conditions, fostering convergence without uniformity. Regional courts. The ECOWAS Court of Justice, West Africa, sometimes hears cases involving Sharia-based inheritance disputes, applying human rights safeguards. Its jurisprudence gradually shapes national reforms in Niger and Nigeria's northern states. Can trade and human rights treaties iron out the friction between divine and human law, ensuring investors, citizens, and believers navigate a predictable legal landscape? Where do we draw the line between legitimate cultural exemptions and unlawful discrimination in global covenants? Is the future of Sharia adaptation a patchwork of localized reforms, or a movement toward a unified, conscience-friendly jurisprudence? In an era of instant communication and borderless networks, Sharia finds new frontiers and fresh challenges. Across the Muslim world, scholars and technologists grapple with questions no jurist of old could have imagined. E-minarets and virtual sermons. Satellite mosques beam khutbahs worldwide. E-minarets deliver adhan on smartphones at prayer times. Yet, who vets online imams? Without standardized accreditation, extremist voices can masquerade as legitimate muftis, issuing fatwas that spread unchecked across social platforms. Online Sharia courts, platforms in Indonesia and Malaysia, now offer e-mediation for family disputes, using video conferencing to convene religious judges. These systems promise greater access, but also raise concerns about data privacy, jurisdictional authority, and enforceability of rulings when parties live in different countries. Blockchain Waqf management. Charitable endowments, Waqf, are recorded on blockchain to ensure transparency. Donors trace assets and see distributions in real time. This innovation combats corruption, but relies on digital literacy and infrastructure, risking exclusion of rural communities and raising questions on how classical jurists view immutable, automated record-keeping. AI-driven fatwas. Early experiments with artificial intelligence aim to parse Quran and Hadith to offer instant fatwas. Proponents tout efficiency. Critics warn against delegating nuanced jurisprudence to algorithms that cannot grasp moral context or spiritual subtlety. When Sharia moves online, how do we ensure authority, authenticity, and accountability? Can digital platforms preserve the human wisdom essential to ijtihad, or will they dilute it into formulaic verdicts? Does faith lose its communal depth when practice becomes an app, more transaction than transformation? As personal data for religious practice becomes priceless, issues of surveillance and freedom of belief come to the fore. State monitoring of religious apps. In some Gulf states, authorities deploy spyware to monitor messaging groups where believers discuss jurisprudence. Under the guise of combating extremism, they risk criminalizing legitimate theological debate and chilling open discourse. Encrypted communities and safe spaces. Diaspora Muslims use end-to-end encrypted platforms to seek counsel on sensitive issues, apostasy, gender identity, interfaith marriage, without fear of reprisal. These digital sanctuaries mirror the Prophet's private counsel, yet operate outside any formal jurisdiction. Data sovereignty. Who owns your Quran app logs, zakat calculations, and online confession records? When cloud servers sit in foreign lands, believers must trust that their intimate spiritual data won't be harvested for commercial or political ends. Jurists now debate rulings on digital tahara, ritual purity of encrypted data. Global cyber fatwa networks. Emerging networks connect muftis from Cairo to Kuala Lumpur, sharing queries in real time. While this fosters collaboration, it also creates heavy traffic. Dozens of fatwas on the same issue, leaving seekers overwhelmed by conflicting opinions and uncertain which authority to follow. How can we protect digital religious freedoms without opening doors to extremism? When our innermost doubts are typed into an app, who safeguards our privacy and conscience? Can a truly free Islamic discourse flourish online, or will state and corporate interests compromise its integrity? Long before any legal code takes effect, the first lawgiver stands within each believer. Jihad al-Nafs, the struggle of the soul, shapes how societies breathe, speak, and legislate. Without confronting our own fears, prejudices, and desires, no external reform can hold. From personal to collective. When individuals tame anger and envy through prayer and self-reflection, those virtues ripple outward. A community where neighbors forgive minor slights in their hearts will need fewer adjudications in the courts. Where gossip is stilled at its source, within the tongue's impulse, public debates become earnest dialogues rather than mud-flinging contests. Norms of compassion. Inner discipline cultivates habits of mercy. When you practice forgiving a personal insult, you become less willing to endorse harsh punishments for social offenses. This dynamic underlies the rise of restorative justice circles in North Africa, where former judges now mediate village disputes through empathy-focused listening rather than punitive decrees. Ethics of listening. Jihad al-Nafs teaches us patience with our own doubts. Communities that institutionalize meditation, silent retreats, or guided Quranic contemplation embed that patience in their gatherings. Town councils in southern Morocco begin meetings with 5 minutes of silent reflection, an exercise borrowed from Sufi khalwa, intended to calm egos before collective decision-making. Ask yourself, what if every law commenced with a moment of inner audit? Do I harbor bias? Am I driven by anger? Then public policy would spring from conscious compassion, not reactionary fear. Across the Muslim world, grassroots movements prove that inner work can transform outer structures. Tunisia's civic workshops. After 2011, civil society groups launched Heart and Deed seminars in Tunis and Sfax. Participants journal their personal struggles, greed, despair, prejudice, and share in guided circles before drafting community bylaws. The result? Neighborhood associations report 60% fewer complaints and a 30% increase in volunteer cleanup initiatives. Malaysia's Youth Soul Training. NGOs like Pelita Jiwa send at-risk students to forest retreats where, for 3 days, technology is banned. They fast, memorize Quran passages on mercy, and perform daily dhikr. Graduates return with a heightened sense of personal responsibility. Studies show recidivism in juvenile centers falls by half when participants undergo this program. United Kingdom's mosque mediation cadres. In Bradford and Birmingham, imams train as civic mediators. Before advising on family disputes, they engage in personal mindfulness modules, learning to notice anger's first stirrings. When they then sit with litigants, they model calm, breaking cycles of escalation that the secular family courts often struggle to contain. These examples illustrate a simple truth. Laws enforced by hearts already at peace carry more weight than laws enforced by fear of penalty. When personal transformation precedes public regulation, the social fabric repairs itself from its frayed edges inward. As Muslim-majority states engage with international covenants, tensions emerge between universal rights and religious norms. Freedom of conscience. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, affirms freedom to have or adopt a religion or belief of one's choice, including the right to change religion. Yet many constitutions reserve apostasy and blasphemy as punishable offenses. Morocco and Indonesia ratify ICCPR but issue reservations on articles conflicting with Sharia, creating a dual legal standard that upholds international image while preserving domestic religious controls. Gender equality. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CDAW, demands equal rights in marriage, inheritance, and political participation. Tunisia and Morocco have implemented legal reforms, Tunisian Personal Status Code, 1956, and Moroccan Mudawana, 2004, to comply. Other states, like Saudi Arabia and Iran, ratify CEDAW only with stringent reservations, arguing that full compliance would contravene Quranic prescriptions. Freedom of expression. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights protects speech and belief. Yet defamation, apostasy, and blasphemy laws in Pakistan and Bangladesh criminalize criticism of religion, leading to imprisonment and social persecution. International NGOs decry such statutes as irreconcilable with Article 18 of UDHR, but local authorities defend them as essential for public order and moral integrity. Can a state genuinely honor freedom of belief if it sanctions those who leave Islam? Where does one draw the line between protecting religious sentiments and suppressing legitimate critique? Is a patched-in reservation to a human rights treaty a sustainable solution, or does it institutionalize inequality? In the digital era, personal data becomes the new domain of Sharia versus state power. Civic tech for accountability apps, like Madad in Jordan track judicial efficiency. Users rate judges on fairness and timeliness. But when scores on personal status cases, inheritance custody, reflect Sharia rulings, public feedback risks colliding with religious authority, raising questions about who judges the judge. State surveillance of faith governments deploy AI-powered monitoring of online sermons and social media posts. In Egypt and Malaysia, algorithms flag keywords, apostasy, blasphemy, triggering real-name investigations. This form of digital muhakama, trial, bypasses due process safeguards, chilling free inquiry long before any formal court is involved. Encrypted councils and digital fatwas diaspora networks in Europe and North America rely on end-to-end platforms, Signal, Wire, to consult scholars anonymously. While this protects vulnerable seekers, it also fragments authority. Dozens of uncoordinated fatwas appear on identical questions, leaving believers uncertain which to follow and undermining communal coherence. Blockchain for Waqf and Charity Saudi and UAE pilot projects record Waqf endowments on permissioned blockchains, providing immutable ledgers. Donors see real-time disbursements to education or health projects. Yet classical fiqh debates whether an irrevocable smart contract, one that can't be undone, can fulfill the juristic requirement for Waqf trustees to adapt to changing social needs. Can digital tools enhance transparency and justice in Sharia application, or will they become instruments of control? When our conscience-driven choices are logged and scored, who protects our inner freedom? Is there an e-fatwa standard we can trust, or must authority always remain embodied in human scholars? In the search for equilibrium between divine precepts and human governance, we confront fundamental questions of authority and legitimacy. At its core lies a philosophical tension. Must law be rooted in transcendent truth or in collective human consent? Divine episteme versus human epistocracy, Sharia's claim. As the will of God articulated through scripture and prophetic example, Sharia asserts an epistemic authority that transcends temporal whims. Its moral imperatives aim to guide souls toward ethical excellence, prioritizing maqasid, the higher objectives of justice, mercy, and wisdom. Secular legitimacy. Modern constitutionalism derives from the social contract. Laws gain force through democratic enactment and consent of the governed. Secular states argue that legitimacy flows not from divine revelation, but from the collective will, ensuring adaptability to evolving norms. Ethical pluralism versus moral absolutism. Absolutism holds that Sharia contains immutable moral truths, applicable across contexts. Its proponents caution that relativistic law risks moral drift, diluting the ethical bedrock of society. Pluralism embraces diversity of moral visions. Secular frameworks welcome myriad philosophical and religious traditions, negotiating values through public discourse. Yet pluralism can fracture coherence, leaving communities without shared moral touchstones. Unity through conscience. Ask yourself, can a shared ethic rooted in freedom of conscience reconcile these tensions? If each individual's moral compass is calibrated by both reasoned consent and reflective faith, perhaps law emerges not from hierarchy, but from harmonious dialogue between sacred text and civic reason. The role of ijtihad in collective deliberation. Historically, ijtihad empowered qualified jurists to interpret Sharia for new realities, reflecting communal well-being. Likewise, democratic jurists employ reasoned judgment to update codes. A blended model could institutionalize ijtihad alongside constitutional review, embedding both divine objectives and popular consent within legislative processes. And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variation of your languages and colors. Verily, in that are signs for men of sound knowledge. Quran 30:22, thematic echo. In this light, diversity becomes not a threat, but a testament to divine creativity, inviting legal systems that honor multiple voices while converging on universal goods, life, dignity, and freedom. As our journey nears its end, we arrive at the paradox that has pulsed beneath every question. The most faithful enactment of divine law may be the fullest embrace of human freedom. Freedom as fulfillment of divine will. True Sharia is not enforced through coercion, but through willingly aligned hearts. When individuals choose ethical conduct out of conviction, divine objectives are realized more powerfully than by mandated obedience. Law as invitation, not imposition. Imagine legal systems that frame their statutes as invitations. Consider mercy and flourish. Rather than threats of punishment, laws could highlight spiritual and social benefits of compliance, fostering a culture where virtue is chosen, not inflicted. Conscience, the ultimate arbiter. In Republican practice, judges interpret statutes. In Sharia, muhkamat, clear texts, guide unequivocal rulings. Yet between them lies mutashabihat, ambiguous verses, inviting reflection. Conscience occupies this space, adjudicating moral complexity when texts alone cannot decide. A new model of statehood. The future may lie in a consociational blend. Constitutional provisions guarantee freedom of belief, equality before the law, and the right to seek religious guidance. Advisory religious councils offer non-binding interpretations accessible to all faiths. Ordinary courts adjudicate disputes based on secular statutes, while religious tribunals facilitate voluntary matters like family law, constrained by overarching human rights norms. In such a polity, divine law and democratic governance do not battle, they dance. Each informs and elevates the other. Sacred values inspire just laws, and popular consent breathes life into spiritual principles. God commands justice and kindness and giving to kinsfolk, and he forbids wrongdoing and injustice. Quran 1690. Thus we end where we began, at the crossroads of law and liberty. The truest protection of faith is not enclosure, but the expansive field of freedom, where hearts, guided by conscience, choose virtue in full awareness. In the wake of centuries of tension, can we draft a social contract that honors both divine guidance and pluralistic governance? The contours of such a model emerge from lessons learned. Constitutional guarantees of conscience. Embed a clear Bill of Rights protecting freedom of belief and non-belief, with explicit safeguards against discrimination on religious grounds. Guarantee that no citizen is compelled to adhere to Sharia beyond voluntary matters, worship, personal status, and that civil law remains neutral in public affairs. Voluntary religious tribunals permit Sharia-based adjudication in family and inheritance disputes when both parties consent, subject to oversight by constitutional courts to ensure compliance with basic human rights standards. Establish an independent council of ijtihad composed of qualified scholars from diverse madahib and legal experts to issue advisory opinions on emerging issues without binding authority over civil law. Deliberative democracy with ethical foundations, institutionalize public forums and civic assemblies that begin sessions with moments of silent reflection, invoking the spirit of inner jihad to calibrate debates by conscience rather than faction. Encourage civic education curricula that teach both constitutional principles and the maqasid al-shar'a, highlighting shared objectives: justice, mercy, human dignity, and social welfare. Restorative justice and community reconciliation replace punitive norms for moral offenses, e.g., slander, moral disputes, with mediation circles led by trained imams and civic mediators focusing on reconciliation, restitution, and social healing. Use Waqf and Zakah funds to support victims of injustice and fund community development projects, demonstrating that divine charity underpins civic solidarity. Together, these elements can yield a living framework where Sharia and secular governance do not compete but collaborate, each reinforcing a culture of shared ethics, civic trust, and spiritual integrity. As we close this exploration, reflect on the paradox at the heart of divine law. True enactment of Sharia flourishes in the soil of freedom. Freedom as divine gift. Choice is the mechanism through which moral virtues gain authenticity. When obedience flows from conviction, not coercion, laws become invitations to excellence. Conscience over coercion. A society that trusts individual conscience cultivates responsibility, creativity, and resilience, far more than one that binds compliance through fear. Shared values, diverse expressions, holding fast to universal goods, life, knowledge, compassion, allows communities to celebrate their pluralism, each finding its path to those shared ends. And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to the worlds. Quran 21:107, thematic echo. In that mercy we find our guide, law that heals, rules that enlighten, and freedom that honors the divine spark within every soul. FaqeerKhamosh.